From some disturbing secrets about the White House to some truly boggling facts about famous monuments like the Taj Mahal and the Eiffel Tower, here are 10 shocking facts about famous landmarks. Number 10. The bust of the Filipino dictator. The bust of Ferdinand Marcos from the Philippines is probably not a very well-known monument to most people. However, it was a huge source of controversy in the Philippines. It was originally situated alongside a major highway, but in order for the bust to be created in the first place, indigenous residents had to be displaced from the area. The land was reportedly sold at a ridiculously low price, and the native population was kicked out. The constitution of this bust began back in 1978 along the Marcos Highway. It was constructed by the Philippine Tourism Authority and was meant to be the centerpiece for a giant park dedicated to the dictator that would have included a golf course, a sports club, and a hotel. But this thing just really looks like a sad imitation of Mount Rushmore in the United States. It took about 2 years to finish the statue, but the park was never made. Then, 6 years later, the bust was covered in animal blood by the indigenous people as a way to excise it and try to reclaim their land. Then in 1989, leftist rebels bombed the statue but didn't quite destroy it. As you can see, there's a ridiculous amount of controversy and hate surrounding this statue. It was finally destroyed on December 29, 2002 by alleged treasure hunters who thought that within the statue were parts of the infamous Yamashita treasure. They used dynamite to blow it apart, but they never found any treasure. It ended up being a good thing the bust was destroyed, as most people viewed it as a symbol of evil and corrupt government anyway. After it was destroyed, the statue was never rebuilt. Number 9. Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal is definitely the most famous monument in all of India. But there are a few things you might not know about this famous landmark. First of all, it was built to honor the favorite wife of an emperor. Shah Jahan had several different wives during his life, but the Taj Mahal was built for his third wife, which happened to be his favorite. They were married for 19 years and had 14 children. Construction began in 1632, the year after her death. It then took 2 decades to complete. Another fascinating thing about the Taj Mahal is that it's perfectly symmetrical. In fact, the entire place is designed perfectly, except for the gravesite of Shah Jahan, which was introduced to the Taj Mahal in 1666 and is slightly off-center. Another design aspect is that the 4 130-foot, 40-meter-tall spires were designed so that in case of architectural failure, they would not collapse onto the crypt of Shah Jahan's wife. The towers were designed to fall away from the rest of the building so that the grave would not be damaged. In fact, this kind of a collapse is still a very real concern with the Taj Mahal. As recently as the 20th century, surveyors noticed signs of structural decay and are worried that the Taj Mahal could collapse entirely basically at any moment. This is definitely something you want to keep in mind on your next visit. And the final fun fact about the Taj Mahal is that it took 1,000 elephants to transport all the heavy building materials during the 20-year construction project. Number 8. The Eiffel Tower. Out of all the landmarks in the world, the Eiffel Tower is probably the most famous. This French construction is the place to go on many romantic honeymoons, and it's one of the most visited landmarks on the entire planet. The tower opened on March 31, 1889. It was originally built as an entrance arch for the 1889 World's Fair. It was actually built to mark the 100th anniversary of the French Revolution as the centerpiece of the World's Fair. The commission of the tower was given to a construction firm owned by a man named Gustave Eiffel. He was a bridge builder, architect, and metal expert. This is the same guy who helped design the Statue of Liberty and the Garabit Viaduct, which at the time was the highest bridge in the world. In the beginning, Gustave Eiffel actually rejected the first design of the tower. He felt that the tower was too minimalistic and wanted to add more details and flourishes. He didn't approve the final design until 1884. In terms of building the actual tower, according to Mental Floss, it took 300 steelworkers over 2 years to construct, using more than 18,000 metallic parts, 2.5 million rivets, and 40 tons of paint. Upon completion, the Eiffel Tower was the tallest structure in the world until 1930. It was only supposed to stand for 20 years, then be dismantled in 1909. But then, during the First World War, someone decided it was a good place to build a telegraph antenna, and the tower was then used as a transmitter to help jam German communications. Have you ever visited the Eiffel Tower? How was it? Did you visit on a romantic vacation or for some other reason? Let me know what you thought of it in the comments below. Then be sure to subscribe if you haven't already, so you can stay up to date with all the latest videos right here on American Eye. Number 7. The Sphinx. If the Eiffel Tower is the most famous landmark in the world, the Sphinx is definitely the coolest. But did you know that the Great Sphinx of Giza is not actually a sphinx? A sphinx consists of a lion's body, a woman's head, and a bird's wings. The Egyptian Sphinx has a male's head, and it doesn't have any wings. It also wasn't called the Great Sphinx in the beginning. Somewhere around 1400 BC, the statue was known as Statue of the Very Great Khepri. Later it was known as Horus of the Horizon. Throughout the years, the ancient Egyptians gave the Sphinx all kinds of weird names. Perhaps the most interesting unknown fact is that the Sphinx was not originally the bland sand color you see it as now. In the beginning, researchers believed that it was completely painted in very vivid colors. Researchers think that the Sphinx was painted red, blue, and yellow, as hints of dried paint have been found all over its body. But as you can imagine, after several thousand years of sand and wind, the color has been blown away. Number 6. The Statue of Liberty. For many, the Statue of Liberty is the very image of American liberty. But did you know that the Statue of Liberty is actually French? Her head spent some time in Paris at the World's Fair before the entire statue was given as a gift to celebrate the American Revolution and the friendship between America and France. She was actually used as a lighthouse in the beginning. She guided ships and sailors home after their long trips across the ocean. Another thing people don't know is that the Statue of Liberty's head is not quite on properly. It was discovered in 1982 that the head was installed 2 feet off center, giving her kind of a wonky neck. While anyone is allowed to visit the Statue of Liberty, nobody is physically allowed to go inside of the torch. In 1916, the statue suffered some damage from the Germans, and nobody has been allowed to go inside the torch since then. One of the most overlooked features of the statue is that she has broken shackles around her feet, which symbolize the country of America from moving away from slavery. Her right foot is also slightly forward, symbolizing that she's moving towards a new and free era. Number 5. Big Ben. The United Kingdom has a lot of great landmarks, but the most popular one is definitely Big Ben in the capital of London. It's situated in Westminster, and a lot of people don't know that the official name of Big Ben is actually the Great Bell. Big Ben is technically a nickname for the large bell inside of the Elizabeth Tower. But when you put Elizabeth Tower and the Great Bell together, you get Big Ben. Construction was completed in 1859, but before 2012, the tower was known as Clock Tower. The name wasn't officially changed to Elizabeth Tower until 2012, but still everyone just calls it Big Ben. So you might be wondering who exactly Big Ben really is, but nobody actually knows. So far as history is concerned, Londoners began to call it Big Ben, and the name simply stuck. However, there are 2 possible contenders for the inspiration behind the name. It could be because of Sir Benjamin Hall, who oversaw the installation of the Great Bell, or it could be named after Benjamin Conte, who had been a heavyweight boxing champion also nicknamed Big Ben. For those of you who want some specifications on the tower, it was originally designed in the Gothic Revival style. It stands 315 feet, and there are approximately 334 limestone steps that climb to the very top of the tower. There are also some words written below each clock on the tower, which translate to, "O Lord, keep safe our Queen Victoria I." Number 4. The White House. Let's talk about the White House for a minute. First of all, the White House is not actually a house. It's a mansion, and it is absolutely enormous. The White House has 6 floors, 132 rooms, 35 bathrooms, 412 doors, 8 staircases, 3 elevators, and 28 fireplaces. One of the most recent appraisals valued the property at somewhere around $400 million, but honestly, that feels a little low. If you're American and watching this video, you might be disappointed to learn that the White House was actually designed by an Irish architect who started his career in Philadelphia back in 1785. Also, the official name was not adopted until 1901, when Teddy Roosevelt changed the name of the building from Executive Residence to the White House. And, to set the record straight, the first president who lived inside of the White House, which at the time would have been called the Executive Residence, was John Adams, who was the 2nd president in United States history. And to really add insult to injury, the White House was indeed built by slaves. According to White House records, African American slaves were trained on the spot to become carpenters, brickmakers, and quarrymen. So, the very center of American politics was crafted by slaves. Let that one sink in for a minute. Number 3. The Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China is one of the biggest, oldest, and most impressive achievements of human ingenuity. But did you know that it took more than 1,800 years to build? This is because the structure is not a single wall, but was built over a long period of time, joining a lot of different defensive barriers that were initially built to safeguard the territory from various threats. Perhaps the most notable threat was the northern Mongolians of the European steppe, who were always trying to attack the northern lands that were under the control of the Han Dynasty. While the Great Wall is crafted mostly from earth and stone, you may be surprised to find out that one of the main ingredients was also sticky rice. Sticky rice was used as mortar because it is so adhesive. Believe it or not, the inclusion of this rice actually made the walls stronger, and it's allowed them to last a very long time. And finally, just like how the White House was built on the backs of slaves, the construction of the Great Wall was mostly done by convicted criminals, people who were convicted of anything from homicide to tax evasion. According to Mental Floss, building the wall was a very popular punishment, with an estimate of somewhere around 400,000 workers dying throughout the course of the wall's construction. Number 2. The Leaning Tower of Pisa. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was not originally built to be leaning. The name Pisa actually comes from the Greek word for marshy land. Because the original architects of the cathedral did not take the marshy land into consideration, they basically doomed the tower from the very beginning. By the time they began to build the second story, the tower was already starting to sink to one side. By then it was too late to turn back. And from then on, the tower just kind of leaned a little bit to one side. Also, the infamous tower is not the only one leaning in the town of Pisa. Because of the soft soil throughout the region, there are actually a lot of slightly leaning towers throughout the town. After the famous Leaning Tower of Pisa, the bell tower of the Church of St. Nicola is the most famous. It was built around the same time back in 1170, and it's slouching unmistakably to one side. You may also be interested to know that the Leaning Tower of Pisa leans in multiple directions. Over the last few hundred years, engineers have tried to fix the lean, but every time the center of gravity is thrown off, and the tower will slouch into a different direction. However, it'll eventually settle into its own southward tilt, where it feels most comfortable. Number 1. The Kremlin. In the Western world, the Kremlin is often seen as the wacky and nefarious opposite to the White House. But the Kremlin is far more interesting than just the center of the Russian government. The Kremlin is actually the largest fortress in all of Europe, according to the Culture Trip. Not only is it the largest active fortress in all of Europe, but it's also the largest medieval fortress in all of Russia. The Kremlin also used to be white. The fortress did not turn red until later in the 19th century. Up until that point, the walls had been plain white in an effort to preserve bricks. And speaking of color, Red Square has nothing to do with the color red. The name of the square actually comes from an old Russian word that means beautiful. The Kremlin is also in the Guinness Book of Records. This is because the Kremlin has the largest bell in the world and the world's largest cannon. The Tsar bell was built in 1735 and is 20 feet, 6 meters tall. The Tsar cannon weighs about 42 tons and was built in 1586. It's the largest cannon by caliber, according to the Guinness Book of World Records. But despite its hugely enormous size, the cannon was never used in any war to date. Have you seen any of these landmarks? Which fact is the most shocking? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks so much for watching. If you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button for all the newest videos right here on American Eye.